David. That was fabulous. So I'm tickled, delighted to introduce you to today's speaker. I don't know how I stumbled onto Dr. Karmen Smith, but I'm delighted. And so I'm going to tell you just about 15 seconds worth about her, and then you can learn more on her website. But Dr. Karmen is an author, a mental health therapist, a metaphysician, and a minister of compassion. She's a very cool lady. So, Dr. Karmen, over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for stumbling across however you did. It was divinely guided. I know that for sure. And so thank you for having me. Like you said, I'm a mental health therapist, and I am a second generation clinical social worker. So my mom was a social worker, and I had no intention of following in her footsteps. I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to go to Hollywood and make movies, and somebody to discover me as I'm walking down Hollywood Boulevard. That's what I was thinking about as a teenager. But my mom would come home and she would deal with pregnant teens, schizophrenics, alcoholics, domestic violence, and she would come home with a beeper. So that was back in the old days. And if there was an emergency, her beeper would go off at 10 at night or 11 o'clock at night, and she would have to rush somewhere. And then she would come and tell us that she was leaving, my sister and I. So one day her beeper went off. She said, I have to go to the hospital. One of my clients punched out his wife. The wife is in the hospital. He's in jail. I've got to go see her in the hospital. Bless his heart. And I thought to myself, I'm 14 years old. What did she just say? Bless his heart? And I said, no, Mom, you mean bless her heart. She's the one in the hospital. And she said, no, bless his heart. She said, nobody grows up thinking, you know what, I want to hurt the people that I love the most. Nobody grows up with that ambition. She said, that's not even him. He's not being himself. He doesn't even know who he is. So if I'm supposed to help him, then I need to see him the way God sees him. And it starts with a blessing. Now, I got that at 40. I did not get that at 14, okay? I thought my mom was naive. I thought she didn't have enough information. And so when I hated my dad, I would begin to tell her all the reasons why she should hate him too. I was like, you don't have enough information, Mom. This is what you need to hate. This is what you need to hate. This is what you need to hate. Once you have all that information, you need to leave. And my mom's heart was different. And so I grew up with that heart. I didn't get it at the time. It took me a while. Because I had separated people into good guy and bad guy, and I could kind of see the clear delineation. And that guy in jail was the bad guy. My dad was the bad guy. And so it took me a long time of self-discovery before I knew my mom's heart. And so I went into social work. And when I went into social work, I worked for agencies. So I worked for Clark County Family Services. And since I was the low man on the totem pole, all of the senior people that were in the therapy department gave me all of the activities that they didn't want to do. And one of them was training correction officers. We were getting a lot of calls in the correctional center, and if you were a therapist in the county, if there was an emergency in detention, juvenile detention, you would run over there and handle that. If there was an emergency in the child abuse shelter at Child Haven, you'd run over and handle that. And if there was something at Spring Mountain Youth Camp way over in Mount Charleston, you'd get in your car and run over and do that. And most of it was suicidal attempts, suicidal ideation, assessments, all of those kinds of things. And so this one thing that I was assigned to do early on was to train correctional officers. And basically, I wanted them to have empathy, because there were a lot of calls coming in that had to do with pepper spraying kids, putting them in restraint chairs, and also doing things that were heavy-handed, that lacked empathy and compassion. And those are God attributes. So these people that are career correctional officers that think that their job is to punish, when actually in detention for juveniles especially, it's supposed to be to reform, to rejuvenate. And so my task was to teach empathy and compassion. Now that's a difficult task, especially for a person coming right on, but I was so naive, if you will. And I took my mom's teachings, but I needed to have some type of physical test or some type of thing to get their attention. So I came up with this one thing. In the very beginning, I gave every other person a rubber band. I paired everybody up. One had one rubber band and the other one didn't have a rubber band. And I said, okay, so now that you're partnered up, the one with the rubber band is A, the one without the rubber band is B. And I said, okay, so when I say A, snap B, I want you to take the rubber band and snap their wrist or their hand. This was years ago. I don't think I would do this now. So I would say, okay, A, snap B. And then A would snap them with a rubber band. And then I'd go on talking. And then all of a sudden I'd say, A, snap B. Go on talking. And then I'd say, A, snap B. Go on talking. And then I said, okay, now you can rest. I said, so A, how did you feel about that? And they said, well, I had the rubber band. I felt pretty good. B said, I didn't have the rubber band. I didn't feel good. I kept waiting for you to say, B, take the rubber band and now snap A, but you never said that. I said, yeah, I never said that. So you had the brunt of all of that, didn't you? And I said, A, you're the parents of the kids that are in detention. And a lot of those kids had bad parenting. But let me tell you, those A people, they're not bad people. They were following the instructions they were given. A, I was giving you instructions and you were following it. The parents that I work with and the kids that you work with, the kids that you work with are B. Let me tell you something about B. B is always waiting for their turn at power. And a lot of those kids that are in detention right now, they took their power maybe by stealing, maybe by assaulting somebody else. But let me tell you, that was not their first experience with that, of not having power, of being a victim. And so what you're experiencing there is A, the parents. That's who I have to deal with, and the kids. I'm their therapist. I need to work with them. And I can't see them as bad people. Do you know why? Because they were following the instructions they were given by their parents. So that's how you have compassion for people. You recognize that we're just precious people. And we're given instructions and we follow them. And it's not until we start doing self-examination that we see that there's a choice, there's another way of being. So I would have to work with the parents of abused and neglected children. I would also work with the children, even when they were in foster care, when they could not be reunited back with their parents. So I could not see the parents as bad people. I could not see the kids' behavior, and sometimes it was off the chart. I could not see the kids' behavior as something that was intrinsic to them and made them bad kids. I had to see them as a reaction to not having power. So now we get to what's happening here in the United States, and you're like, well, how does this relate? We are celebrating, or yesterday celebrated, many, many years of liberation from England. But we have not liberated from fear. We have not liberated from the instructions that we've been given. The instructions that the United States of America developed were to enslave Africans. And in order to enslave a people, you have to pretty much portray them in a negative light, because that will justify what you do. It's just like going off to war. If you go off to war with the Japanese or people in Pakistan, you have to villainize them in order to get everybody on board to do something heinous that they wouldn't normally do. Those are instructions that you give somebody, whether it's the military or whatnot. And so this country has operated under instructions that say that Native Americans are horrible. They're corrupt. And why do you say that? To steal their land. You've got to justify it. So you've got to put some instructions in there. These aren't bad people that we're dealing with. We're dealing with horrible instructions. And so it reminds me of a wonderful quote that Charles Sumner did. He was an abolitionist and also a senator. And he was always radically telling people that slavery is wrong, but not just slavery, but it's the structure that was put in place to enslave Africans. And so one of his quotes, which I love, he stood up in July 4th of 1845 and said, "Nothing resembles God more than that man among us who has arrived at the highest degree of justice." So nothing resembles God more than that man among us who has arrived at the highest degree of justice. So when I read that now, and I look at George Floyd, and I look at police killing Black people, we haven't arrived at the highest degree of justice. And that's a God quality. So what about those instructions? Those instructions, we can say, well, that was years ago. They shouldn't be still in place. Well, they are. And they have a function now. So what is the function of these instructions? The function is, if I can get you to hate on somebody, let's say they have red hair, and I say all red-haired people are horrible, and then I go out and I see somebody with red hair and I can have a fight with that person and then put it on social media and then put it on the news about people with red hair. And then I make a movie and it subliminally tells me that red-haired people are the villains. I can keep you distracted. Meanwhile, I'm robbing from the kitty over here. I'm taking away EPA rights over here. I'm stealing this over here. It just gives them something to hate. just give the Americans, because we're known for this actually, give them something to hate, to chew on, distract them. They love a good hate every now and then. And then I can do something over here. So I want you to see how these instructions, and I call it a weapon of mass destruction. See how these things are intrinsic and baked into the American culture. So now that we know that this is about instructions, it's not about people. You love people. You trust God. Now, how do you have enough love? Because I have a lot of love for people that don't like me. Now, that sounds weird to most people, not to you guys, because you are spiritual warriors. You're love warriors. But to most people, they love people that like them, agree with them, think like they do. But in order to be a love warrior, which Ernest Holmes is asking us to really get in there, get in the trenches of ourselves, see all of the instructions that we were given and how our thoughts are corrupted. Once we see that, we have compassion for people that can't see their own stuff. This is difficult to do. This is not easy. If it was easy, we would not have this structure in place. We would have done what the abolitionists talked about, is don't put up all these monuments as a smokescreen, as a place for people to believe that this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, when you are not brave enough to go into the shadow of your own self, clean that out, and realize the fundamental truth, which is love thy neighbor as you love yourself. Now, this is usually where I would do the holy dance or drop the mic, because Jesus was saying, okay, you can forget everything else, but remember this: love your neighbor as you love yourself. And when you can do that, then you realized who you are, that only God can love somebody that doesn't agree with them, that hates you. So once you love your neighbor, he didn't say the neighbor that thinks like you. He said, love your neighbor. So only God, through the lens of God, can you love yourself, by loving yourself, even your shadow. Can you look out of those lens, that lens, the God lens, and see that other person and say, oh, I know we don't agree, but you're just following the instructions you were given. I understand that. I get it. I've done the same thing. Yeah. My love for you is not based on that, on your instructions. My love for you is the truth of who you are. You are a God being, capable of destruction and creation. Now, what can we do with this love that we have? What does Ernest Holmes say? What does Jesus say? What do the sages say we can do with this love? We can transmute hate, and we can transmute fear with this love. That's what this country is saturated in right now, where there is not love. Now, this is another part where I would do the holy dance or drop the mic. So let me put it in practical terms. What does it mean now, Karmen? Now. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was getting ready for bed. I was on my phone and I saw on YouTube that a Black man, 24 years old, was hung on a tree in Palmdale, California. And my heart exploded. I mean, I went to a place where I can't even describe to you, but I guess you would say that I lost it. So I'm a spiritual person. I love God. God is in me. I love people. But God said, it was almost like, bop, 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 bop. This is a backlash for Black Lives Matter, all of the protests. This is a punishment. This is a warning. This is a fear. This is an old playbook from the South, from not necessarily the South, but a lot of Black people ran to the North, refugees, because of all the violence that was happening in the South, and one of them was hanging and lynching. So I felt like I had just gone back and then forward, and I was just upheavaled. I was like, oh, wow. And I think the thing that really got me is that they didn't call it murder, they called it suicide. And as a mental health therapist that has been in this field for over 20 years, and I assessed suicide, I'm currently retired, but I assessed it for a living. I said, that is a lie. And I think that is what got me the most. So I got in my car and I drove 4 hours to Palmdale because I wanted to go to the tree. And I was prayed up. I said, if anybody needs to go to the tree, God's people need to go to the tree. Right? Amen. So I went to the tree and I stepped foot on the area. It was underneath an American flag, which was symbolic. Somebody was following the instructions they were given and wanted to make a point. And I got that point, that this is America, who hasn't changed their instructions yet. And so I go there, there's a city hall, police station, fire station. It's in a square in the middle of town. And I stepped foot on that square because I'm very sensitive. I thought I would pick up on a lot of horrible feelings. And I talk about this before. I was stepping on holy ground. There were people all around holding vigil, different colors, different ages, older people like grandmothers on canes, veterans, people there putting balloons on the tree and candles and signs. And it was such a loving place where I thought love was going to be void. But come to think of it, after I thought about it, people were gathered there that were lovers. They were lovers and they knew what that was. It was hate and it was fear. And there were people going there from LA and going there from Las Vegas to shine a light on something that is America's dark past and present. And so that's what love can do. The next day, I went back. I got a hotel room. I wanted to really be present. So the next day I went back and there were 3 police officers that were across the street at the fire station, and they had their bulletproof vests on and their military garb. And I went over to them. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning, and I said, I kept my 6 feet distance. I had my mask on. I had my sunglasses on. And I said to them, I said, are you guys preparing for a protest? And they said, yeah, there's going to be a protest here at 2:30. And I said, oh, okay, because I didn't know. I was like, okay, so I'll wait until 2. And I stood there and I said, yeah, I drove all the way from Las Vegas. They said, oh, you drove from Las Vegas. It's a pause. And then the one officer that was speaking, he said, what do you feel about this? What do you think about this? Is what he said. And I felt something welling up because I didn't have any words. I started to do the ugly cry. So the ugly cry is where your whole face is involved. And I have my mask on, and God told me to take off my sunglasses. And I just cried. I didn't have any words. I cried, and I did not fill that space with words. And I just let my cry be the vibration of love. Because most of the time, you don't have the words, but you have that love that says so many things at the same time. And then after a long pause, and I cried in front of them, he said, well, we're here if you need us. And I walked away. 2:30 came, and there was a beautiful crowd there. Mostly young Caucasian people. And the reason I say that is because they know that the instructions need to change. That this is not about you being a bad person and you being a bad person. It's just we've been given these set of instructions that are killing people, that are keeping people in their place, whatever they decide your place is. And it's not going to stand anymore. That's what love does. Love speaks truth to power. It needs to change. And it's structural. It's baked in. And we have to give up our hate and our fear. When the protest took place, there wasn't a cop around. There were no police cars. I didn't see any. We're walking down the street. No police cars, no bulletproof vests, and no military garb. Let me tell you the power of love. When I cried in front of those police officers, most people think I was crying for Robert Fuller. I was crying for the soul of those police officers. I was looking into their soul. And with love, like my mom would say, bless his heart. So that is our mandate as lovers. This is not me hating on somebody. Hate, as Martin Luther King said, does not take out hate. Darkness does not take out darkness. Only love can do that. And sometimes, maybe most of the time, it's unspoken. But it comes from the heart of pure love. In closing, I'd like to say this beautiful, beautiful Bible verse that keeps coming back to me. And I remember thinking about it when I worked in Child Haven, and there were so many hurting kids that were fearful and would do all kinds of behaviors. They'd call us over and wanted us to do counseling on somebody that was screaming or tearing up a room. And I would go in and I would just sit. With a loving heart, you don't have to fill it with words. I just sit and say, I love you in my mind. I love you no matter what you're doing. I love you unconditionally. And if you had the patience and the love in your heart, they would stop tearing up their room. Maybe come and sit beside you. But I remember one kid just made a pallet in the middle of the floor and laid at my feet after being such a terror. And I rubbed his back and I said, I love you. And this Bible verse, perfect love casts out fear. And it goes on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, that the fear is in those that have not been loved perfectly. They have not been loved perfectly. Agape, unconditional love. You don't have to love me in return for this and that. Unconditional love. So who has perfect love? Because we need it now. Who has perfect love? We need it now. Because there are those who have not been loved perfectly. Those police officers, I loved them perfectly. The children at Child Haven, I loved them perfectly. And when I look at my shadow and I see the imperfections, all the times that I've come up wrong, all the times that I haven't loved perfectly, I love me perfectly so that I can be what is needed right now. Right now. Thank you. Namaste.